Is World War III happening right now? Over the past month, the news stories have been ramping up. The media has been foaming at the mouth, speculating on how the next Great War could start any day now. This is because of the growing tension along the Ukrainian and Russian border. We've already talked a decent amount about this conflict on this channel, but once again, we do need to have a little history lesson to understand why this tension is even here at all. In case you weren't familiar, Russia doesn't like Ukraine. Or maybe they actually like them a little bit too much. Either way, they aren't a fan of how Ukraine is currently their own independent nation and believe that they should be a part of Russia. This is all because of what went down in the last century. Over the last 100 years, Ukraine has been under occupation or attack for most of it. Lots of the time was spent under the rule of the Soviet Union. This is because after World War II, Ukraine merged into the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic and became part of the Soviet Union. This was the status quo until 1991 when the Soviet Union fell and Ukraine voted for their independence. In that vote, a staggering 92.3% of the country wanted to become independent from Russia, and finally they were. The fact that 92.3% of the country wanted to get away should tell you how the Ukrainian people felt about being under Russian rule. In short, not great. There's also a horrible history here because Ukraine acted as Joseph Stalin's punching bag for quite some time. In the 1930s, he starved the Ukrainian people and millions died. It was said by survivors of this famine that Russian soldiers would see the Ukrainian people making a stew of twigs and leaves and literally force them to dump it out. So needless to say, it was really bad. All of this history has caused there to be some really bad blood between both countries over the years. There's also the whole situation that happened rather recently with the Crimean Peninsula. The Crimean Peninsula was a region of Ukraine that got annexed by the Russians in 2014. This region of Ukraine had a large Russian population due to what took place in 1954. In 1954, the Crimean Peninsula was actually part of Russia until it was given over to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Then, when Ukraine got independence, it retained this land even though Russia wanted it back. Finally, their frustration boiled over when they eventually decided to just walk in and take it. This caused an uproar on the world stage, but Russia really didn't care less and continued along their merry way, annexing the entire region. Now, tensions are flaring once again, and over the last 6 months, Russian troops have been slowly moving their way to the border of Ukraine. This has led to many world leaders calling the Russians out and accusing them of planning an invasion. Russia has flat out denied such claims, saying that they can do as they please with their troops in their own nation. Something is definitely up though, and with the powers that are at play, this certainly has the makings of the beginning of a major world war. Now, to answer the question of the video, is World War III happening right now? No, World War III is not currently happening. However, that doesn't mean that it isn't gonna happen very soon. The Insider has come out with a great article talking about the places in the world where World War III is most likely to break out. In that article, they write, easily the most likely flashpoint for great power war in 2022 lies along the border between Russia and Ukraine. Over the past 6 months, Russia has steadily built up forces along the frontier as Kiev, Moscow, and Washington have traded barbs. Russia's immediate concerns involve the Ukrainian acquisition and use of Turkish drones along its border regions, along with a general increase in Ukrainian military power. Moscow's long-range problem is its inability to reverse the Western orientation that Kiev has adopted since 2014. Russia has publicly argued that it wants to resolve the issues of Ukraine and of Russia's relationship with Nato on a permanent basis. The United States and Nato have not responded positively to these overtures, but have notably failed to guarantee Ukrainian security. If Russia launches an invasion of Ukraine, things could get ugly quickly. Despite improvements in Ukrainian forces, most analysts expect that Russia would win quick victories along the border, potentially gaining access to the Ukrainian heartland. Direct Russian military action would put immense pressure on the United States to respond in some fashion. And respond they would. Joe Biden has come out and said publicly that they would have have Ukraine's back if Russia was to invade. This would come in the form of sanctions and most likely the mobilization of troops to Ukraine. NATO would also be right there as well and sending tons of allies to Ukraine's aid. If the United States, NATO, and Russia are all involved in a war, then one can certainly make the argument that we have reached the criteria for World War III. Also, you have to imagine that if all of these powers get into it with one another, that other countries are going to want to join the fray as well. China is currently sitting back and watching as this unfolds. Many experts on the subject are struggling to determine exactly how China would respond if something like this were to break out. However, they are all in agreement that they wouldn't sit back and do nothing forever. There are also a ton of other smaller countries that would likely find their way into the mix if something like this occurred, and before we know it, the world would be at war. So if we aren't at war now, then when could we be, and what can we do to stop this from happening? Well, we stop it from happening with diplomacy. The two sides need to talk and work something out. Problem is, they have a hard time being in the same room as each other and don't really like to converse. Bigger problem is that the things Russia wants are things that the other side is not willing to give them. One of the big sticking points right now is for Ukraine to never be allowed into NATO. Part of the reason Russia wants this is because it would further enforce Ukraine as an independent nation, which they don't like. It would also add lots of Western influence over Ukraine, something that Russia doesn't want for their next door neighbor. NATO has responded to these reports along with some other ones saying that these are impossible requests. If neither side is willing to budge, then we're gonna run into an issue here pretty fast. Now, I should note that the UN is going to be addressing some of these issues very soon, and there will be a public meeting on the matter. The problem is that Russia doesn't even want to be there. The UN voted on Monday about having a public meeting on Russia's growing force on Ukraine's border, and the vote passed 10-2. The two that voted against it, though, were Russia themselves and China. So clearly Russia has no desire to publicly meet about what they're up to, and therefore it's going to be really hard to come up with a diplomatic solution. If diplomacy doesn't win out and resolve the issue and we do enter World War III, when could that happen? Well, honestly, any day now. Joe Biden has come out and warned the public that he believes something is gonna go down in February and that Russia will make a move then. Russia has obviously come out and denied such things, but we're talking about the United States president publicly warning us about an actual war with a superpower this month. If there's any substance to these claims, then that's really scary. Now, we could just be dealing with a big Russian ruse, and that's something that needs to be evaluated as well. Some experts are saying that this whole troop mobilization is just a ploy from Putin and he actually has no intention to invade whatsoever. Simply by placing 100,000 troops at the border forces the United States and others to focus on that and take their demands very seriously. This threat of war is very real, and even if he doesn't intend to pull the trigger, the global superpowers must acknowledge it. This could be very true, and if that's the case, then Putin is definitely out here playing a good chess game. The thing is, the rest of the world simply can't take that risk. They have to take this threat seriously and focus in on what's going on, because simply allowing Russia to walk in and capture Ukraine isn't an option anymore. Also, we haven't mentioned in this video, but it is believed that if Ukraine was to stand by themselves in such a battle, then even though they may put up a bit of a fight, Russia would come out victorious without incurring horrible losses. Ukraine needs the support of their allies if they are to retain their independence, assuming an invasion does in fact happen. All in all, we aren't in World War III yet, but give it a few weeks. I'm really hoping that this whole thing dies down and diplomacy wins out, but with the way things are going, it's hard to see how that's gonna happen. But please let me know in the comments down below your thoughts. What do you think is gonna happen here? If there is a World War III, then how is it gonna play out, and who would win that conflict if it did happen? Also, please hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I've been your host, Nicholas Playlog, and I'll catch you next time.